Hello, everyone. We are so excited. Thank you so much, Triangle Artworks, for hosting this amazing Lunch and Learn event. As Cynthia just said, my name is Jackie Sanders. I am a studio artist based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I do abstract geometric paintings, art products, murals, and love sharing forward advice and business lessons that I've learned along my journey with my good friend Adriana here, who will introduce herself in a second. We both have studios in downtown Raleigh at Art Space, and we are the co host of a career minded artist podcast called Level Up Artists. So we love partnering with Triangle Artworks to facilitate conversations like this. Because obviously the business side of being an artist is especially important as you move forward in your career. So Adriana and I have known each other for several years at this point, and I'm very excited to be doing this event with her as well. So I will kick it over to her for her to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Adriana Amay. Like Jackie mentioned, I'm also at ArtSpace. If anybody's local and wants to pop by sometime and say hi. I work on abstract murals, ceramic sculptures, paintings, a little bit of everything. But essentially, a lot of what we do, as part of the podcast and as part of us being here, is we like to give back to other artists in the community by sharing forward the knowledge and the lessons that we have learned, either from other folks or from our own experiences, and kind of help with disseminating, and trying to break down some of those barriers, especially about the business side of art or the career side of art, and kind of give everybody, some of the different paths that are available and the information needed so that folks can, succeed in their creative endeavors. So, without further ado, we would like to have Elizabeth here introduce yourself, since she will be talking to us about this amazing topic regarding QuickBooks. So, Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Cynthia, Jackie, and Adriana. My name is Elizabeth Skibby. I'm the owner of Acorn Accounting, and I am not artistic. Um, I was thinking about how I was going to introduce myself as we got closer to today, and I was like, I'm not really artistic, but I do have a deep, deep appreciation of art, and I feel like it makes the world around us a more beautiful place. And so I really respect that there are people in our space, literally and figuratively, who do have the skills to make these beautiful pieces on the walls, on shelves, out in public spaces. And I recognize that you have a passion behind that gift, but maybe you didn't get into art in order to do all the administrative things behind the scenes. I have an MBA in accounting. Back was when I was an undergrad, I was actually sitting in an accounting class that was required, and it was a very large lecture hall. And I would not have picked this class if it had been left to me without being a requirement. It's like 500 students, and I was sitting in this class, and I thought, this does not make sense. This is so confusing. Why would anybody go into this field? And here we are. So I fully empathize with maybe some of the feelings that you have around counting and the numbers associated with your business and running an art business. Um, but there are solutions. And so the goal is to get your shoulders a little bit further away from your ears, bring them down a little bit with understanding and explanation.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to it. And you just unlocked a core memory of me doing accounting too, because that was my business background. So I remember those semesters of like, do we really have to do this? Is it really a requirement? But at the end of the day, especially for those of us that are trying to at least figure out how to pay at least some of our bills with art, it's so important, even if it's to just grasp some of the basics of accounting, even if it's just, the pluses and the minus, in a simple T chart, with a Sharpie on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. At least getting some of the concepts of it. So thank you so much for that. Any questions from anybody before Elizabeth shares her screen and we start our presentation?
And in addition
Okay,
to
perfect.
questions, if everyone wants to put into the chat. As people may know, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little button that says chat. If you click that, a window will open on the right-hand side. And so that's where you can put questions throughout this event. And right now, I would love for everyone to put in, if you guys have a specific thing that you are looking to learn about during this Lunch and Learn, maybe something specific to your business, maybe a general idea of how to apply this or that, then please go ahead and put it in the chat. That way, Elizabeth, through her presentation, can make special note of those. And any questions during the presentation, Adriana and I will be keeping an eye out on the chat, compiling a list so that throughout it, Elizabeth will be able to answer those questions. So even if she's in the middle of talking, feel free to put it in there and we'll make sure we get to as many questions as we can.
And one quick last note before Elizabeth shares her screen, if anybody has to hop off early, has other commitments, things of that nature, this meeting is being recorded if you joined us just recently, and it will be on the YouTube, and through Level Up Artist Podcast, like we'll help disseminate this as well. So if you feel like you have to, yeah, we'll make sure that you can see the rest of it later.
Alrighty. And with that, we'll let Elizabeth go ahead and share her slides and get us started with QuickBooks for Creative Entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. I would also like to start off the presentation by saying that I recognize that as an artist, you may be in a different place than maybe where we're starting. And so we want to provide some foundational information so that we're all starting in a similar place. And so for some of you, this may be review. Some of it may be, aha, I did not know this. This is helpful. Or maybe you'll fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and that's okay too. All that being said, we are not providing tax advice. We are not providing legal advice. And this is not advice specific to your situation. So have a chat with your advisors on follow-up questions that you may have. The point of having bookkeeping, other than to perhaps be like another thing that you have to do in the midst of running a business, it should be easy to maintain. If it's not easy to maintain, that presents a hurdle. It makes it challenging to keep it up, going, flowing, and defeats the purpose of putting it in place in the first place. It should meet your needs. If you, for example, are a vendor who have a weekly or biweekly market where you are selling your art, your software, your POS should meet your needs so that you are able to transact sales with the form of currency that your customers would like to pay with at the markets. And then your POS system and your accounting system should at least talk semi-friendly to be able to share that information. Any other software that you're using, your accounting system should integrate with that software, at least to the level and the level of detail that you want and need. And then whatever system you put in place should give you the ability to grow. Additionally, and I did not have this as a bullet point here, when I say bookkeeping systems, this could be software. So it could be QuickBooks. There's other software systems out there. It should be the people that you have in place supporting this software and its maintenance. And it should also be what processes that it specifically, if you are maintaining your software, what process do you have in place? Or what process do you have in place in conjunction with a bookkeeper or other folks who are helping you in this area? Great question. Why is it important? Why are we going through the hassle of implementing software or people as support systems or processes? I imagine, at least for some of you, this last April 15th was a time of stress when you're like, oh, where did I put those numbers? How do I extract this set of data from this one account and making it meaningful? Or you're scrambling around going, oh gosh, what else did I not remember to put in? If you have a process, this system, this uniform way of approaching your numbers, you shouldn't have that stressful time. It should be much more streamlined, and it should just be like another thing to check off. By implementing bookkeeping practices, that's an opportunity to implement best practices. So are you updating your books on a monthly basis? If you're submitting sales tax or other state and government entity reports, are you submitting those in a timely manner so that you're meeting those deadlines? And then also, if you have software implemented, it gives you the ability to look proactively at what your numbers are doing. And if you're looking proactively at what your numbers are doing, you're able to make more data driven decisions. That it's less fly by the seat of your pants. Oh, I guess I have enough money in the bank account to do this thing I'd like to do coming up. No, you can look at the trends of your revenue or maybe some of your expenses, and you can plan out maybe some of your forward looking plans as well. So let's start with a little bit of fundamentals on your financial statements. There are three main financial statements. One is your cash flow. And as a small business owner, we are all wondering, do I have more money coming in than is going out? Or how do I balance when there's an imbalance in that flow? Because sometimes there are one-time annual expenses that will give you a net loss for the month. That's normal and anticipated, but you need to be able to plan appropriately so that your checking account stays positive in the flow of things, so to speak. Pun fully intended. Second financial statement is your balance sheet, and we'll go into a little more detail on that. And then the main one that you hear everybody talking about is your income statement, which can also be called your P&L or your profit and loss. And that shows what you've made less your expenses and will show your net income or loss. And if you take that snapshot of the entire fiscal year and provide that to your tax preparer, that is what is used to prepare your taxes. So cash flow simply shows your cash activity, money in, money out, and it can be from a number of different sources. As a small business owner, the theme of your cash flow is really important. This particular statement is not going to be one that you're going to be using a ton though. The concept is probably an overarching theme as to like how you run your business and how you make some of your spending and revenue decisions. Your balance sheet is typically going to come up if you are trying to get funding, loans, through private lenders, through banks, and think of it kind of like a mortgage on your house. So your assets are what's the value of your home? Liabilities is like what do you still owe on the home? Equity is the difference of those two. So assets equals liabilities plus equity. Unless you are doing lending or trying to get funding, the balance sheet is probably not going to be super critical for you. But we bring it up so that you have some awareness and understanding of what you might see on that balance sheet. And then, as mentioned, your P&L, the short version is revenue minus expenses is your profit or your loss. And if you have your accounting software set up, and when we go into the sample account, we can look at this. You can look at what your numbers have done historically to kind of understand what might be happening going forward as well. So you did not come here going, gosh, I would love to learn about accounting. I came to learn about QuickBooks. I hear you. We're getting there, stepping up in that direction. All that being said, before you are opening up a QuickBooks account or any other bookkeeping software for that matter, there are a few things that you need to do or will have done in the midst of creating your business. So first and foremost, you register with the state online. In the state of North Carolina, that's with the Secretary of State. It's a relatively straightforward process. If you are outside of the state of North Carolina, Google what that process looks like or reach out to maybe one of your small business consulting centers. I know here in North Carolina, the community colleges offer some mentoring services around that. And so there may be some free or low cost services depending on where you live. So you register with the state, you are now in existence within the state. Great, congratulations. That's a great first step. The next step is go on the IRS website and request and receive your EIN. Part of that process, though, is to determine the best tax status for you and your circumstances. And there's a number of factors that go into play on determining best tax status. I will say the two most common you will see for small business are LLC and S Corp. I'm not advising on either. So just figure that out before you go and request your EIN. And then once you have your EIN, you can set up your business bank account and also upload applications for business credit cards if that's the direction you're going. So you have all the back end stuff set up. You exist with the state, you exist with the IRS, you have a business bank account. That's great. How are you planning on keeping your financial records? And so that's where we start getting into the QuickBooks. And this is presuming that you're choosing QuickBooks. So there are different subscription tiers with different associated costs. Each of those tiers offers different privileges and access. So for example, the lowest tier allows one user access. If you don't have employees, you don't have other people helping you in your business, one user may be really and truly all you need. That's great. You may be running a very large enterprise business and you need a couple dozen people to have access. Well, that low tier is probably not going to be the right fit for you. So determine what you need access to, what integration software you need to account for. And I would suggest start at the low end and step up as you need to. You don't have to commit to hundreds of dollars every month for your software subscription cost. That's overkill, especially if you're pre-revenue. So you've determined which subscription tier makes the most sense for you. And then you're going to gather some information to get it set up. You need your company name, some of that contact information. You are also going to need the logins for your business bank account and your credit cards. And then in the midst of setting all this up, QuickBooks will ask a few prompting questions and they will suggest a chart of accounts, which is the accounts that will determine what populate your P&L and your balance sheet. The suggested chart of accounts is a great first start, but then adjust it for what your needs are. Maybe you want sub-accounts so you can see in more detail. Maybe you have specific revenue streams and you want that broken out. Okay, that's very doable. This might be a good stopping point or pausing point. Are there any questions that we should address before we continue on?
See, a few questions in the chat. I love how you set up, even just thinking about which level of access each of the artists may need, the different factors. But even simplifying it a little bit more, if someone feels intimidated by QuickBooks, where would they actually go to buy the software? Would they go to their website? Is it you have to order it and then it's shipped to you? Where exactly they get it from?
Let me show you. All right. So the QuickBooks, I think a lot of people have heard about QuickBooks Desktop, which is getting phased out on support. And so cloud-based is going to be where you're going to end up. So you're going to end up at QuickBooksIntuit.com.
Awesome.
And across the top, talks about products and features. If you are determining which subscription tier you'd like to end up at, start at plans and pricing. Let's see if it's going to take us there.
Which this is the one of things I love about virtual seminars where it's just like share the screen, walk us through it, and that's perfect. I know you just mentioned a handful of these things to look at the different features, but it's nice to be able to see it too.
Absolutely. And I will say high level, think about this in terms of number of users that need access. Also, best practice is every user logging into QuickBooks should have their own unique login and password. That is for tracking who's making changes. That's also for determining if some users should have limited access to just specific areas. You don't want to give everybody access to everything. That's oversharing, and it's not a great position to be in. And if somebody doesn't have their own login and password and you really are hesitant to step up, think about whether they actually need access to QuickBooks, and that may answer your question. That being said, so I would argue the majority of folks starting off with QuickBooks are probably going to be considering the Simple Start, which is the one user, and the Essentials. And the biggest changes, aside from users, is that you can track time in the Essentials. Which
Awesome. Yeah,
may or may
that's
not be
really good to know.
useful. The QuickBooks will also offer specials from time to time. Please note that even though they have it in the big bold text, this is the special 50% off for 3 months pricing. And so your Simple Start, you are committing to $35 a month after that third month. For the Essentials, you are committing to $65 a month after the first 3 months. So if you're like me and you're like, oh, squirrel, it's so cheap. It is, but just gather all the facts.
Yes. So it's good to know rather than seeing it come up on a future monthly statement, being like, "Oh, why'd that change?"
Exactly. And then I know some people are hesitant about using cloud-based. I get that. Just you are entitled to those feelings. And the other piece to this is it seems like a lot of software, if not all software, is moving in that direction. And so think about what you need to do and consider to become less uncomfortable with that. I will say one advantage to QuickBooks Online being cloud based is that there are a lot of other softwares that are also cloud based that integrate and play nicely with QuickBooks. And so it really offers accessibility so that you are not tethered to one desktop in one physical location to get those numbers to work out. That you can be on the go and do it.
And these typically have a mobile component also, right? Like not just a desktop, but you could have it on your iPad or on your phone or other elements too.
Yes, to all of those.
Perfect.
And phone versus desktop or phone versus laptop has different functionality. They each have their advantages and disadvantages, and so you will figure out what setting works best for what you're trying to accomplish.
Perfect. Some of the other questions that have come in, Elizabeth, before we keep moving on,
Mhm.
are in terms of invoicing and inventory and kind of like some of the benefits of moving. One of the questions we received from Sarah was about invoicing and inventory benefits of doing them through QuickBooks. Any tips in that? And then Luke also had a question about keeping track of everything through spreadsheets and not being sure about any benefits of transitioning through. So I feel like for a lot of folks, they may be in a similar place of like, okay, but will it help me, as a creative, as an artist, as someone that's, dealing with, different income streams, perhaps inventory, like how can I look into that and what are some of the benefits of doing that?
Absolutely. So if you specifically want inventory functionality, you're looking at the plus level here, which is $99 a month. Um, that being said, it may be more cost effective to either stick with whatever system you have now or go with one of the lower tiers and then do inventory adjustments throughout the year. And to Luke's point, I do not always give advice. In fact, I sometimes I advise against implementing a bookkeeping system. And let me explain why and when. So, especially if you are pre-revenue, you don't have income coming in. So either you have a loan from an outside source, from a friend, from family. You've cashed out some sort of account to support this business and you don't have sales yet. Well, focus your spending on the things that need to be subsidized in order to make this business successful. As that revenue gains traction and you see more sales, more revenue coming in, then then you think, okay, I've done the core things that had to be done. I needed the supplies to create the art. I needed specific equipment. I needed to pay for studio space. Those are the things that have to happen that need to be spent on in order to get the business going. The bookkeeping, I is nice, but it's not necessary. You do need to have that information gathered together in a meaningful way for certain milestones. And if you're not yet looking at your financials in a proactive, forward looking manner, I don't think that you should be spending money that you don't have or
Mhm.
that is potentially a scarce resource on your software, on your accounting software immediately. Like get to the point where that can be a thing that you add on to what you're spending on,
Mhm.
but it's not, you don't have to have it immediately. I will say you need to have your financials together by the time tax time rolls around. So either be like, okay, by January 1st, I will implement my accounting software and I will pull in that full year of historical data and get caught up and everything will be kosher. Or you are committed to having solid records, hopefully in an Excel spreadsheet or something that's robust and accurate and making that work. On
Mhm.
the flip side, though, if you are keeping your numbers in Excel, it's manual.
Mhm.
It is very manual, and you are committing to every transaction. So even best case, you have business accounts. Your personal accounts are in one set of in one silo, and your business accounts are in another silo, and they never meet.
Mhm.
No commingling. So even if your business accounts are separate from your personal stuff, you are committed to taking those transactions. Maybe you're doing a monthly export and you are dropping them into Excel and you are having to touch every transaction probably 2 to 4 times to be able to pull together records that are meaningful enough for the purposes of your taxes come April. You're also having to touch those 2 to 4 times every time so that you can pull those records together. And it's every time there's manual steps, it's a potential speed bump or
Mhm.
a dissuasive measure that you're like, oh, I don't want to have to deal with my books right now.
Yep. And that may be
Yeah,
why
but
many people are on the call today. But I love your advice too of if it is going to be a potential financial burden that you don't have the luxury to lean into right now, then having something manual in a spreadsheet. And I would add maybe even adding like whether it's a weekly calendar reminder, probably at most infrequent would be once a month to make that part of a block off a bit of time every month, every week to update those things. It's a lot easier to think of your transactions over the last week to be like, what was this Amazon business expense from 2.5 months ago? You're like, I don't remember what I bought 2.5 months ago, but you need to have record of it. So if it is going to be the more manual, set yourself up for success in that way until you grow the business to the point where the financial paying for software like QuickBooks would be more of a relief of not having to do it manually anymore, but it's not. Um,
Well, and regardless of whether you have software implemented or you're doing your books manually, the cadence of that activity is really important. So if it's weekly, if it's monthly, just commit to it and figure out like, do you need an accountability partner? Maybe there's another artist in your community where you're like, gosh, neither of us really enjoys this activity, but if we hold each other accountable, we know we're going to get it done. And you figure out what tools you can put in place that that cadence can happen the way you'd like it to.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think we need to mention, and even though this is not so much about taxes, but it kind of is related to taxes for those of you that are reporting sales tax on a quarterly basis, you have to do this anyways. So at least 4 times a year, unless you're set up for monthly, which some folks are through the North Carolina Department of Revenue, NCDOR. I'm sure some of you love that website. You know, but essentially, like, you already have to show them proof of your sales for the quarter or for the month, depending how you're set up. So if you're already in the practice, I'm glad, Elizabeth, that you're not discounting. Yes, spreadsheets can be more manual, but also it is doable for those of you, especially if you're starting out on a shoestring budget. A lot of these different sites that you might be using do allow you to do exports in CSV files or Excel friendly files. So you don't have to manually type these, folks. Like, you will have to figure out how to copy paste it so that it looks correctly, but you can import this data, kind of put it together, especially if you're receiving payments from Venmo and PayPal and a credit card and a debit card and cash and all these things, to try to put them together, and again, at least on a quarterly basis, kind of put them together. But it
Well, and
seems
adding
like
on,
this would actually, like, help if it's connecting at least to some of the accounts.
well, the other thing adding on to that, Adriana, is if wherever you're selling, whatever that like terminal point is, the more you can make that uniform so that you're not
Hmm.
getting payments 6 different ways. If you can have one system from which you're paying, whether it's like Shopify or Square,
Square. Mhm.
yes, like have one method where you have those sales and you can pull your sales reports from there, and hopefully your POS system is also calculating sales tax correctly for you. But best practice is don't do these one-off sales, because if you're like, oh, I sold my neighbor this piece of art and they sent me a Venmo to my personal account. You're adding manual steps to the process.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that kind of ties in very similarly to another question in the chat, which may continue with the conversation and the presentation. But with QuickBooks specifically, rather than having to create new accounts or categories for everything, is there a way to create tags or categories if you're an artist that, let's say, does multiple events, and you can say, okay, all of these transactions were from the downtown Raleigh art market, and these were for the Cary market. So that way you can categorize it within the software.
Short answer, yes. Let me see if I can figure out which tier. It's classes. It's called class. I'm not seeing it immediately. There's a couple different ways to do it. You can say either class. So maybe you have different revenue channels, or you can also create, here, let's go into QuickBooks. We don't need to go back to the PowerPoint slide necessarily. So what you can do is go into your chart of accounts, and then where it says income, you could, so granted, this is a landscaping sample company. We're embracing it for what it offers us. But basically, figure out with your revenue stream, if you know that you are going to be at specific recurring events, you can create sub accounts. And so instead of like with labor that went into sprinklers and drip systems, well, this could be markets. This could be your Raleigh markets. This could be your Cary markets. This could be your online sales. Um, there's any number of ways to break down your revenue so that it's a meaningful way to view it. Because at the end of the day, what you're looking for is not necessarily an automated, but far less manual way to produce your profit and loss. And my favorite view is like year to date in month, because then you can look at trends on the financials. And so if you're like, okay, I don't see any revenue January through May. Well, maybe your business started in May and it takes time to get traction on that revenue. And so you wouldn't expect to see revenue before that time. Or maybe your business is cyclical. Maybe your lifestyle is set up so that you spend the half a year in a completely different place. And then the other half of the year when you're here, you're selling at markets. And so there are reasons why you see trends and numbers behaving the way that you see them behaving when you have your profit and loss. And the drawback to doing your P&L manually outside of software is that you don't have this view in a proactive manner. And so that being said, this is not the end all be all. It's just this is what we're reaching for. This is our goal,
Mhm.
especially if your books are a pain point.
Excellent. Can you confirm, Elizabeth, if QuickBooks can pull data automatically from bank accounts? And if so, can you connect more than one bank account to it, as far as you're aware?
Uh, Short answer is yes and yes. Um,
Excellent.
yes. So, for example, in this sample account, they have a checking account, a savings account, and one MasterCard loaded. And these bank feeds are they are automatically pulling in. So you have your credit card, or let's do a checking account. You have your checking account, and all those transactions that are flowing through your bank or your credit card account should then also be automatically pulling into QuickBooks so that you are avoiding that manual download with whatever frequency you're choosing to do it into CSV and then copying and pasting it into your master running spreadsheet for the year. Those transactions automatically show up here. And so then what you do, instead of having to put them in, let's Pix hardware. So what you do is the transaction comes in, you fill in your vendor or customer, you put in your account. You're like, well, that would be office expenses. And you hit add, and that's it. You are done with that transaction. It is now pushed to the P&L, and you don't need to touch it again.
And if another transaction comes in from the same vendor, like, does QuickBooks then try to say, hey, is this office supplies? Like, does it try to learn based on the vendors?
There are some presumptive assumptions applied. Um,
Okay.
some some of them are good. Some of them are like, ooh, that's a little bit of a miss.
So
Um,
double check it.
yes. That being said, I never, ever, ever recommend, unless by some chance it is 110% never deviates. Do not create a rule where it's an auto ad, because if it's an auto ad, then it's going to apply your vendor, it's going to apply your account, and it's going to add it automatically without giving you the opportunity to apply human knowledge to the transaction. And so, Amazon, Amazon could be office supplies. Amazon could be part of your setup for your tent and some of your art viewing. Like you have it set up
Mhm.
for sale.
You have like
Um,
easels and
yes,
card
or hooks
displays.
for your really fancy
Yep.
pegboard wall. Amazon could also be art supplies.
Yep.
And so if
Mhm.
it's one of those, well, it could be, and you have a list of potential categories, auto ad is not a good option.
Mhm. Mhm. So that way you would go in each time and specify to Amazon, okay, this one was art supplies. This one was equipment rather than this is always the same thing.
Yes. And that being said, like this particular list has, actually, I can tell you, has 24 transactions. If you are going through your transactions on a timely basis and you're not trying to remember what you were doing back in January, these transactions should be pretty fresh. And you should be able to get through 24 transactions applying vendor slash customer or account in like less than 30 minutes.
Mhm.
Elizabeth, a quick question from earlier. I want to make sure we don't miss. We had a question. What is a chart of accounts?
Great question. I love it. So the chart of accounts dictates whether a specific transaction ends up on the balance sheet or on the P&L. And it will show you here. It's basically how do we want to classify that transaction? And so we're going to go hang out in the P&L for a second. So all of these lines, the design income, discounts given, job materials, all these laborer sub accounts, those are accounts on the chart of accounts. And it simply says, what category are we applying this particular transaction to? Where should it be filed? How do we want it to be recorded? And specifically with this P&L, these categories, I mean, not the subcategories, but the higher level categories, tie to categories that will be on your tax return, regardless of the type of entity you are. And they will translate over so that your numbers can be then made into a tax return. And so these chart of accounts serves a couple different purposes. One, it's the translation of like how do you take the map of what your business, how your business did, and translate that for the purpose of the tax return. But then specifically with these sub accounts, it's like what level of detail provides meaningful insight. And so this is a landscaping company, for example, with their job materials, looking at sub accounts of decks and patios, plants and soil, sprinklers and drip systems provides a meaningful level of detail to understand how their business is doing. Up here in income, so say you are you sell art and you sell prints, postcards, magnets, and you have a couple of different revenue streams. You sell through pop-up markets, and then you have an online shop. Well, maybe your sub accounts for income are pop-up markets and online sales. Maybe that's the meaningful level of detail for you to understand like how your products are selling. Or maybe it's by product line. Maybe you do pet portraits and you also do still life. Well, then maybe your sub accounts are broken down by those two categories. There's a lot of different ways to drill down into your sub accounts. That being said, you don't want to do a sub account like a specific client or a specific vendor. Like we wouldn't want to have Amazon as an account under job expenses. That's not meaningful. But then the
Elizabeth, we have a couple questions regarding tagging. One of the ones that came earlier is there a way to tag invoices you send so that they categorize to a specific income category? And the other one is how can you use the tag data basically to organize this to get to the next level?
So tag, yes. Short answer is yes. And I will show you. The tagging doesn't have great reports to pull from. So what I would recommend is if as you are doing your invoicing, you are populating your invoice lines with product and service line items and at specific, let's do sprinkler heads. Okay, So if I wanted to invoice for sprinkler heads, but I wanted to determine which revenue line it goes to, I'm going into that specific product or service information item. And then here in income account, I can dictate every time I invoice for sprinkler heads, where does that revenue go? And so right now, my only option is sales of product income, but maybe I call that um, at cost. Maybe I have a specific line item where I'm not actually making money off of it. I can change the income account to what I need it to be and save and close. And then when I do an invoice, assuming assuming my invoices are through QuickBooks, that is valid. If you are invoicing outside of QuickBooks, like Square, or you're sending a PayPal invoice, then you need to change your mapping from that outside software to dictate how that gets mapped once it's in QuickBooks. Was that sufficient explanation on that question?
Sounds good.
Um,
Mhm.
the point of
Excellent.
invoicing
We're
elsewhere.
looking through a few of the other questions.
Yeah.
The ones that I have for you. So you mentioned a little bit earlier in the conversation that the apps perhaps have a little bit of a different functionality than full website, which makes sense because trying to squeeze this is essentially like a giant database. Trying to squeeze all this into a phone screen or phone view might be a little too much, and very hard to navigate to try to find all the, all the nitty-gritty details. But um, do you know if QuickBooks has the availability to create an invoice right on a phone? Like I'm just thinking, client says, "Yes, I want to do this commission. I want to do this mural. Can I do it right on the phone?" As far as you're aware.
Uh, I believe you can. I was, and I say that based on my garage door guy invoiced me
Mhm.
off of his phone. So I know at least a couple years ago it was possible. I will
Excellent.
also say that if you put a transaction through and you're like, gosh, I put the wrong account on it, or you create an invoice, but you haven't mapped, changed the mapping on the revenue account that it goes to, that's okay. You can change it after the fact. Just because you put something through one way does not mean that it's unchangeable. And so there is some flexibility and grace in the software system.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Not everybody at once, as the joke goes.
I would say if there's not, let's go back to the PowerPoint slides. I have a couple more points I would like to make.
Awesome, that'd be
They're
great.
Excellent.
also outside of QuickBooks.
Oh, and we did have a follow-up question. What if it's an Amazon purchase that has both materials and equipment? Could you manually divide it up into the different categories?
Yes, you can split it.
Excellent. Thank you.
The other thing I would like to point out, QuickBooks and Intuit have a lot of training. It can also feel overwhelming, like it's too much information. And if that's the case, reach out to any number of resources to get specific personalized training on the one or two things that you need. Like time is money. And so, yes, you can spend 8 hours on the broad spectrum QuickBooks training, but it's going to cover far more than what you need and want. And you may end up frustrated in the meantime because you're like, I just have the one question. So figure out who it's either maybe fellow artists or your neighbor who does QuickBooks. like figure out who your trusted resources are so that when you have those one-off questions, you know that you can go to somebody and get a specific answer without wasting hours and hours of time on more information than what you need. All right. A few other considerations, and these are tangential to QuickBooks, but also really important. Sales tax. Set up your system for reporting. So determine a way that you are capturing your sales, that your sales tax is being calculated correctly at the time of the sale, and that you have a way to pull that information with the frequency that you need to. And then the other piece is 1099 versus W 2. Please, for the love of everything, do it correctly. And by that, I mean, if you have somebody specifically, this is the example here. If you have somebody that you have said, hey, I need you to go staff my tent at this location for these specific hours, that is a W 2 role because you are telling them when and where and how to do the job. They are a W 2 employee, run payroll. And payroll does not have to be super expensive. There are some very cost efficient payroll systems out there that will calculate all the payroll things for you correctly. But that person staffing the tent at a specific location and specific times is not a 1099 employee because a 1099 would be like, all right, I need this task or this project completed by this date 3 weeks out. Let me know if you have questions. They're very different. And so on the one hand, I see a lot of folks saying, yes, but if I pay 1099, it's cheaper. Well, it is and it isn't. You're not paying all the taxes and the withholdings, but you're not doing it correctly. And if you get audited and caught, that cost is not worth it.
Mm-mm.
And payroll does not have to be so scary. So that's my word of wisdom there. And then cash versus accrual. I would imagine that the majority of your businesses are cash. Um, cash simply means that if the cash is coming into your hands, that is your revenue. If the money is leaving your hands or your bank account, that is an expense. At the time that that money moves in or out of your account, you are recognizing it. Versus accrual, which is kind of a pain in the butt to keep up with. It's like, oh, I'm going to a conference 6 months from now. I am paying the registration in February. I'm not taking that registration expense in February. It'll sit on my balance sheet until the conference in August. It adds extra steps. So the vast majority of your businesses will be cash and it's all good. The other piece here is expenses versus capital expenditures. A $20 paintbrush is not going to be a capital expenditure. However, if you are purchasing a $20,000 kiln, that very well could be a capital expenditure and there's depreciation involved. So have a chat. I mean, $20 versus $20,000 is a big range, but have a chat with your tax preparer about where that threshold is on expense versus capital expenditures so that given your circumstances and how you run your business, you have a good approach in place and a good way of delineating between those two categories. So all that being said, work smarter. Having software in place is not always a must have. Sometimes it's saying, gosh, that's really nice, but I can't afford that right now. And that's okay.
Mhm.
Understand where you and your business are at that point and think about what makes sense in terms of spending. So create your separate business entity, keep your personal and your business expenses separate. Do not let them touch. And then when you have a system in place, make sure that permissions are appropriately applied so that not everybody has access to all the information. It's on a need to know basis. And then just develop a habit. What is the cadence that works for you? Maybe you don't love that cadence, but you're like, gosh, I will get an accountability partner and we will hold each other on that schedule. Are there any other questions? Did we want to go play in QuickBooks again?
You have a few more minutes left if anybody has any burning questions they would like to get out of the way, or maybe have Elizabeth show on screen. Anything you're curious about having her click around.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is excellent.
Yeah. I
This
especially
is
loved, Elizabeth, those wrap up points of evaluating where you are in your business because, yes, of course, we all aspire to have the perfectly organized books and inventory and the streamlined invoice system that takes 2 minutes to do, but also understanding where you are in your business, what the needs are. And ultimately, as with any system, it's only as organized as the information that you put into it. And so, yes, you can streamline it with being able to automate it with tags and categories, but really understanding your numbers and the foundation of it ultimately comes first. And then these are simply tools to help you streamline it a little bit further.
Right.
Yep.
Elizabeth, I wanted to ask about the tag scan. You said that there's limited like data utilization for it, but are there screens or reports that do harness the tagging capabilities?
Let's see if I can find it. I will say it is a newer feature and I'm admittedly less familiar with it, but let's go exploring together.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I've been using tags and I just love that extra layer of organization, but I just feel like I'm underutilizing whatever it's supposed to do.
I would ask, what is the goal in using tags? Like, what are you hoping to achieve?
I guess more like minute reporting with income and spending.
Got it. The other way to do that is, oh, here we go. Oh, okay. Good
oh,
news. Ooh, there's a profit and loss by tag group.
Okay, great.
It would appear that there are no tags in this sample one. I will say the completeness of this report is going to be dictated by how consistently you are tagging.
Yeah. Well, I add the tag to my rules, which I understand, like you said, like don't auto add, which I don't auto add my rules. So I still have the final say, but you can like auto tag things and I double check that they're tagged. So it's pretty consistent, I'd say. So this is cool. This is new. I haven't seen this.
Well, and your approach to do the rule, but don't auto add is a really smart way to apply the, hey, AI, please apply a presumptive tag, but then still gives you the final say to confirm that it is correct. So super, super smart.
Great. Thanks.
Oh, I think that's it. That's sounds like a wrap. If there are any last minute questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Otherwise, Elizabeth, thank you so much. This has been super helpful, super informative, for those of us that might have been a little bit curious about what it looks like behind the scenes, but we're not ready to sign up for a trial that charges our card yet. Not saying we won't, but not yet. Then this has been good to kind of see what some of the capabilities of QuickBooks are. And obviously, with all of this, we're definitely going to have the recording available. If anybody wants to go back and review and take a second look at, the either the presentation or what Elizabeth showed us on screen. So you can look at a little bit closer, pause and replay as needed.
It was a great class. Thank you very much.
Mhm. Awesome. And thank you everyone for being on today. I know we're right at the time now, but thank you for taking your lunch break or a little bit in your afternoon to be on the call. And of course, thank you Triangle Artworks as a whole for all of their amazing classes. They always have classes going on, so make sure to check out their website for upcoming seminars, free classes, paid courses. They are always incredible with a lot of different topics for business and career-minded artists. So as you said
Thank
at
you
the
very
top
much.
and in the middle, this will be a recording on the Artswell YouTube page. So keep an eye out for that.